A shriek of sirens tears through the cold Chicago night. Rain-slicked pavement catches the glow of emergency lights as paramedics rush to a figure lying motionless on the sidewalk. Nearby, slumped against the gleaming glass wall of a high-rise, stands Daniel. His breaths come out ragged, his suit jacket drenched. Hours ago, he was just another ambitious banker on the verge of a breakthrough. Now, as he stares at the woman at his feet, his entire world has imploded. This isn't a random tragedy. It's the final act of a love triangle steeped in manipulation and fueled by an unforgivable betrayal. Before we peel back the layers of pride, obsession, and corporate power that brought one life to a brutal end, thank you for joining us on this dark journey. And be sure to subscribe to True Crime Atlas for more revelations from the underbelly of human ambition. Chicago's financial corridor fosters a unique kind of hunger, a desire to climb the rungs of power and wealth while the city's skyline casts long shadows across the thriving streets. Not too long ago, Daniel stood among this enclave of dealmakers with a rising star reputation at one of the city's major banks. Clients trusted his calm, measured approach. Mentors praised his work ethic. Nothing seemed out of reach. Yet behind every titanic success story, forces lurk that can topple even the most determined climber. During his swift ascent, Daniel stationed himself in a polished corner office at Phoenix Tower, a looming testament to corporate might. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bustling downtown, and Daniel used to gaze out at the city while finalizing spreadsheets worth millions. He spent late nights in that office, sifting through prospectuses, forging essential connections. And by his side, for a time, was Ava, a bright, elegant colleague with an innate skill for building client relationships. The two forged an immediate bond, both fueled by career ambitions and fearless in the face of cutthroat competition. Ava was more than a colleague. Her stride down the office halls exuded confidence. She could soften even the hardest-nosed client with a well-placed compliment or an immaculate presentation, while Daniel excelled at the technical end. Charts, financial models, negotiations. Ava's social finesse complemented him perfectly. Outside of work, their partnership surged with an electric chemistry. Their free evenings brimmed with talk of promotions and big deals, laced with laughter and a shared drive to conquer Chicago's elite banking circle. People who watched them glimpsed a future power couple, two unstoppable forces rising together. But success in a towering financial giant can be a double-edged sword. And Ava's draw wasn't limited to Daniel alone. One day, a new figure arrived at the bank. Marcus, an executive manager with an impeccable resume, a proud family fortune, and a reputation for shaking up institutions wherever he landed. Executives called him a game changer, the man who could modernize old-school practices and inject radical ideas into the firm. Younger staff scrambled to impress him, hoping to catch the eye of the new power broker in the building. Marcus didn't go merely for strategic overhauls and bigger returns. He enjoyed exerting influence. Quickly, everyone could see that included personal matters. He set exacting expectations with subordinates. Familiar routines shifted. New deadlines, new performance metrics, fresh directives. Daniel initially welcomed the challenge. Marcus might be the type of boss who recognized drive and rewarded it with prime opportunities. Meanwhile, Ava discovered that Marcus's interests stretched beyond client accounts. He recognized her social intelligence and attention to detail. Lunch meetings and after-hours strategy sessions became usual fare. It all looked harmless, a manager mentoring a promising young staff member. Except something about their dynamic soon cut Daniel out of the picture entirely. Those first warning signs appeared during the planning of a major client pitch with Remington Holdings. a real estate conglomerate rumored to be on the brink of a multi-million-dollar expansion. The approach was Daniel's idea from the start, though Ava supported him. They'd prepared meticulously, each piece of data and presentation deck polished until it dazzled. Then, out of the blue, Marcus took charge. He told Daniel to stay behind and handle a different internal matter. Ava and Marcus would lead the client pitch themselves. Daniel's frustration simmered. Wasn't he supposed to be the star performer for this account? Why exclude him from the final push? Ava sent him a quick text. He wants me to handle it with him. I'll fill you in later. She offered no real explanation beyond that. The next day, Daniel tried to talk to her, but the conversation devolved into tense accusations. Ava argued that Daniel was overreacting, that it was merely an organizational shuffle. He tried to believe her, but doubt stabbed at him. Then came the morning when Daniel found Ava's desk conspicuously empty. She was out with Marcus at a working breakfast. The rumors around the office were not subtle. Whispers surfaced that Ava had become more than just a promising employee to Marcus, that lunches had turned into dinners, that friendly mentorship had slid into something else. Daniel swallowed his suspicions, clinging to the hope that corporate gossip could be exaggerated. Yet each time he tried to corner Ava, she pivoted, citing a client meeting or a phone call she had to rush to. The distance between them widened. Weeks later, the final blow landed in Marcus's office. Daniel, summoned without ceremony, found a termination letter ready on the desk. Attached were performance memos Daniel had never seen, alleging poor teamwork and lapses in responsibilities, complete fabrications as far as he was concerned. The entire meeting lasted mere minutes, each second a gut punch. Marcus ended by offering the cold comfort of, "It's best you move on." Security escorted Daniel out, leaving him with a cardboard box of personal items, the sum of his once bright future. On top of that humiliation, Ava declared their relationship over. She told him that they had drifted apart, that her life had shifted, that she needed new directions. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Crushed, Daniel found himself adrift in Chicago's winter gloom. He stepped out into the biting wind with no job, no partner, and a sense of betrayal twisting like a knife in his gut. For a while he wandered the streets aimlessly. He tried forging new connections, scheduling job interviews, and putting on a brave face for old acquaintances. No matter how hard he tried, though, it became evident that negative references from Marcus loomed over him. A promising lead would spark up, only to sputter out once the prospective employer followed up on Daniel's background. Nighttime in Chicago can be both mesmerizing and dangerous for a mind in turmoil. Daniel sought distraction in bars and rundown clubs. He stopped returning calls from concerned friends. Sometimes, he stared at social media updates, where Ava flaunted glimpses of an increasingly luxurious life. He singled out the expensive restaurants, the fancy apartments, the new designer clothes. Marcus's presence irradiated each scene, standing next to her, possibly orchestrating everything. The rational side of Daniel told him to let go and rebuild his life somewhere else. But heartbreak, pride, and fury blurred that logic. Fed by insomnia, Daniel's anger gnawed into obsession. He reached out to Ava through anonymous texts, dropping subtle hints of regret, then pivoting to undertones of menace. She blocked the numbers, but that only fueled him further. Some nights, he roamed near her building, glimpsing her stepping out of a taxi or returning from dinner with Marcus. Each sighting hammered home how easily she'd moved on. As the weeks crawled by, Daniel's mental state deteriorated. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by beer-soaked nights in a cramped apartment with blinds drawn. His reflection in the bathroom mirror grew more hollow each day, sunken eyes, unkempt hair, a quiet mania swirling behind each glance. Guilt surfaced briefly, warning him that he was on the verge of doing something irreversible. Yet bitterness always triumphed, whispering that Ava and Marcus had destroyed him first. Then the fateful evening arrived. A cold drizzle slicked the sidewalks, shimmering under buzzing fluorescent street lamps. Through routine digital prowling, Daniel learned that Ava would be dining with colleagues downtown. Marcus was reportedly out of town for a conference. Sensing an opportunity, Daniel rushed into the rainy night, nursing a grim determination. He staked out a cafe near the restaurant, tracking the hours. Around 9 p.m., he saw Ava emerge with two coworkers. They chatted amiably before they parted ways. Alone, she started for her apartment on foot. Daniel followed at a distance, tucking himself into shadowy corners whenever she glanced over her shoulder. The city's neon signs bled color onto wet pavement, and the air smelled of damp concrete. His heart pounded like a war drum. Rage and heartbreak clashed in his mind. He ached for some sense of validation, to confront her about her betrayals. As Ava paused in front of a small liquor store, Daniel closed the gap and called her name. Shock registered in her wide eyes. Frozen, she managed a halting greeting. They stood under the store's flickering sign, the hiss of rainfall framing their conversation. Daniel's accusations poured out. About her choosing Marcus and his subsequent firing. About her callous disregard for everything they'd built. Ava tried to de-escalate, urging him to stay calm, to maybe find someplace quiet to talk. But Daniel's fury had a momentum of its own. Side by side under the falling rain, they slipped into a dark side street, presumably to escape the public eye. Daniel's voice rose with each step. Ava tried to explain, yes, her relationship with Marcus began while she and Daniel were on shaky ground, but it wasn't premeditated betrayal. The bank's corporate culture had made their relationship complicated. She conceded that Marcus took advantage of the situation to push Daniel aside. She claimed to regret how swiftly things changed, yet her apology barely penetrated Daniel's scalded emotional armor. When Ava tried to walk away, Daniel blocked her path. He spat out that she'd left him in ruins. Their argument escalated in vicious jabs. Her mention of, "We can't fix the past," triggered Daniel like a spark, hitting gunpowder. Anger erupted into violence. With a sudden movement, he grabbed her arm, demanding answers she couldn't possibly give. She fought back, clumsily swinging her purse. The blow clipped his shoulder. Dripping with anger and rain, Daniel shoved her against a wall, pinning her in a desperate bid for control. A year earlier, the two had been a bright couple forging mutual dreams. Now, one was cornered by cold brick, and the other was unraveling emotionally. Ava's face contorted in terror as Daniel's grip tightened. A final wave of regret flickered in his eyes, the faint shade of a man who realized he'd gone too far. And then he crossed the ultimate line. His hands closed around her throat in a paroxysm of rage and heartbreak. Ava's struggles weakened. Only when her body slackened did Daniel's rage subside to horror. He stumbled backward, letting her slip to the wet ground. Rain pelted them both, but Ava did not move. Daniel's mind whirled, refusing to accept what he'd done. Blood rushed in his ears, drowning out any semblance of clear thought. His mouth hung open, forming silent pleas to reverse time. Lights from distant passing cars threw garish reflections off puddles, illuminating her still form. Daniel had never felt such dread, like a free fall with no bottom in sight. He wanted to scream for help, to step away from the monstrous act that had just unfolded, but fear paralyzed him. Instinct kicked in. He grabbed her phone, checking in a daze whether she'd been on a call. Realizing its incriminating potential, he pockets it without thought. The primal survival drive screamed at him to flee. He looked up and down the deserted street, half expecting a witness to materialize, but the city offered nothing but the hum of distant traffic and the patter of raindrops. Possibly seconds, yet it felt like hours, slipped by before Daniel finally tore himself away, barreling down the street in mindless panic. Once home, he locked himself in and collapsed onto the floor, too drained to cry, too shocked to focus. Everything came in disorganized flashes. The jostle of Ava's body hitting the ground, the angle of her neck, the lifeless stare in her eyes. He thought about calling the police, about heading to the station to confess. But the practical side of his battered psyche insisted that meant a guaranteed life behind bars. Instead, he stripped off his soaked clothes, scoured them for any sign of hair or DNA, and stuffed them into a black trash bag. News of Ava's death broke by the next afternoon. Journalists withheld her name at first, describing only that police responded to a woman found unresponsive on a dimly lit side street. The cause was suspected to be homicide. Daniel watched from a haze, perched on the edge of his sofa with the remote in a shaking hand. A few days later, details leaked, identifying the victim as a bank employee, prompting further speculation. People on social media debated whether it was a random mugging or something more personal. An image from a security camera surfaced, a blurry still showing a hooded figure trailing behind a lone female in the rain. Police asked for tips, urging anyone who recognized the figure to come forward. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Though it could scarcely be recognized as him, he felt the net closing in. He pictured the vantage of every private security camera near that liquor store, the possibility of a license plate capture from passing vehicles, or even eyewitnesses from a window above. Marcus, hearing of Ava's death, made a public appearance on behalf of the bank, expressing shock and sorrow. He set up a scholarship fund in her memory, pledging to help the investigative efforts. Watching that footage, Daniel oscillated between seething anger and an eerie numbness. Did Marcus feel any part of the blame, or was he too busy preserving his own image? A storm of thoughts battered Daniel's mind. On one hand, Ava was gone by Daniel's doing, but in Daniel's darkest nightmares, he pinned the catalyst on Marcus's manipulations. Weeks dragged on. Police combed through leads, but the killer remained at large. Online vlogs and forums erupted with theories, some pinpointing an ex-lover or co-worker. Still, Daniel wasn't publicly named. Perhaps the avalanche would fall eventually, but in the meantime, he felt like a ghost, stumbling around his one-room apartment at odd hours, crossing paths with no one. Guilt and paranoia intertwined, creating a feedback loop of self-destruction. He eyed his meager savings, weighed the possibility of skipping town, of fleeing to another state, and vanishing into ordinary anonymity. But fear anchored him to Chicago, ironically the same city where all his hopes had once soared. When a local station dug deeper into the bank's history, they mentioned that Ava's ex-boyfriend had recently been fired. They didn't drop his name, but Daniel recognized the structure of that sentence. He was the ex-boyfriend. They were sniffing around his story. It was only a matter of time before they connected the dots. Each day, when a knock sounded at the door or the phone rang unexpectedly, Daniel's heart thundered, expecting it to be law enforcement drawing a final curtain on his freedom. Yet day after day, no one came. Daniel's friend Paolo tried to check in, noticing his rapid decline. Paolo confronted him about his reclusiveness, asked about Ava's death, and pressed him to confide if anything was wrong. Daniel deflected with muttered excuses. That evening, after Paolo departed with unanswered questions, Daniel felt the deepest pang of regret yet. He'd been so consumed by his own anguish that he'd severed ties with one of the last decent people in his life. Roughly a month after Ava's murder, Authorities released additional details. The victim's phone was missing, leading investigators to suspect robbery had triggered the violence, or a personal conflict. They suggested the killer took it to hide evidence. Daniel stifled a bitter laugh in his four walls. He still had the phone, switched off, sealed inside a Tupperware container. The mere thought that he had the power to publicly come forward, to lay out all his grievances, or even to destroy the last piece of evidence. Eventually, the city pressed on. Memorials for Ava dotted the social media feeds, overshadowed by the bank's statement about her dedication and promise. Marcus, ironically, advanced in his own career, rumored to be heading up new expansions. Meanwhile, Daniel's days blurred into an endless repetition of stale takeout, sleepless nights, and restless pacing. The spirited, ambitious man he once was had disintegrated under the weight of guilt. Now, he was a recluse with no prospects, and an ever-present terror of the law's inevitable arrival. When the police finally knocked, it was early morning. Daniel froze, forced to confront the final collapse of his illusions. Two detectives sat him down, asking measured questions about his past relationship with Ava, his departure from the bank, and where he'd been on the night of her murder. They carefully observed every twitch of his expression. His responses were mechanical, disjointed. He insisted he was home alone, that he barely kept in touch with Ava, that he'd heard about her death only on the news. They lacked a solid piece of direct evidence at that moment. He was on their radar, but they didn't have enough to charge him, yet their questions carried a menacing edge. After that encounter, Daniel understood the culminating dread. It might be weeks, or even months, but they would keep building a case. In a sense, each new day only extended his limbo of guilt and fear. Backed into a corner, Daniel considered flight again. He could board a bus to another state, assume a new identity, and slip away from the roiling guilt. But the knowledge that he had committed murder in a fit of rage haunted him relentlessly. He thought about turning himself in, feeling that even a lifetime in prison might be a relief compared to this unending psychological torment. In the end, the story of Daniel, the rising star banker, concluded at the same place it truly began, on a rainy Chicago street under flickering lights, except this time, it was the reflection of flashing red and blue police beacons. With enough surveillance, cross-referencing, and possible eyewitness leads, the authorities closed in. Daniel was found in his barren apartment, pale and shaking, next to a duffel bag that suggested a last-minute scramble to escape. They arrested him without incident. The final reports painted a grim but all too familiar tale. An ambitious man driven to madness by professional sabotage and heartbreak, culminating in a moment of irreversible violence. Chicago's financial district never paused to lament. Deals still got done, money still flowed, office politics spun new webs. Marcus continued his climb, unaffected except for carefully chosen soundbites about losing a valued employee. Ava was memorialized in staff bulletins as a bright light extinguished too soon, and Daniel sat in a pale interrogation room. No future ahead except the possibility of a confession that would allow him to lay down his burden, at least in a legal sense. For those who tuned into this dark descent, the lesson was bitter and unadorned. Success can vanish in an instant, replaced by a primal, destructive rage when betrayal and ambition collide. The cost is often a staggering human toll, one that Chicago's skyscrapers bear silent witness to as they preside over the city's restless ambitions. Thank you for joining us on this twisted journey of pride, obsession, and murder. If this account of forbidden love and corporate power grabs you, remember to subscribe to True Crime Atlas for more unflinching dives into the darkest corners of human nature.